Okay, so I'm actually very happy that we are a little group. Is there anybody in the room, and I'm really looking at the three of you that I don't know, where the English, where I should, are you all fine with English? Fine, fine, okay, good. Then I won't worry about it. Stop me if you don't understand something I've said. I'll say it again. Okay. So this is you all are sort of my guinea pigs today. I'm trying something out. And for that reason, I'm glad it's a small group. Parts of it will be interactive. Parts of it will not. But I am really looking forward to the feedback and to see how this actually plays out when it's not in my head, but actually out in the world. So it's called Transmodalities, Conceptualizing Semiotic Affordances in Transnational Communications. Don't you love to be read to? And I will say that what I'm trying to do here is to draw on a transmodalities framework that I have developed. It's just out in an article in Applied Linguistics this month, February. It's March 1st, last month. And I'm going to, you don't have to look it up, I'm going to tell you what it is. I'm going to walk through the pivot points, the complexities, the pivot points. But what I really want to do is take some data from a project and apply it, and not just say here's what it is, but to hopefully show here's why it matters. So let me start by saying that my work in general is at the intersection of language mobility and education. And I say that because for years people told me I needed an elevator speech. When you're on an elevator and that's as much time as you have and someone says to you, what do? You can't launch into a long explanation. So I say my work is at the intersection of language mobility and education, and most people say, what? But still, that's it. So I actually care about kids all around the world, primarily who are being schooled in a language that's not their home language, or who for various reasons are learning or are within ideologies that say they should learn a language that is not their home language. And before I do anything, having said that, I want to say 3 words, but it's more than 3, about mobility. Because we talk about mobility. There's a lot of work done on mobility, and now even super diversity, and all sorts of other phrases that are in vogue. And people are almost always talking about and looking at people who have moved, or families who have moved, or immigrants, emigrants, folks who have moved somewhere that isn't where they are originally from. And for the purposes of this talk, and in general as well, I want to reframe that, because when I think about mobility, and this project is in so many ways about mobility, it is not just people who move. And so I think when I talk about mobility, I'm not talking about people moving, or at least I'm not only talking about people moving. So this slide says other things that move. Languages move, goods move, information, ideas, ideologies. And these are all tied up with one another. And so, for example, in Uganda, and you will see data from Uganda today, kids are being schooled in English. It's not because the kids have moved to English-speaking places. And it isn't even because right now there are English-speaking people who have moved to where they are. It is because historically they were colonized. Even though the colonization is over, the legacy of it is that English is the language of schooling. So these kids who don't speak English in their communities and have never been exposed to English all of a sudden get to school and they're dumped into English. So there's an example of an effective mobility where the mobility isn't the people themselves, okay? And I think the rest sort of speaks for itself. But all of that is part and parcel of globalization. And what I'm interested in is what is the effect of all of this movement, all of these things that move with ever increasing rapidity around the world, and involving ever more people in them. So what's the effect on human communications and understandings and relations with one another? How do we understand it? That's sort of the underlying question. And then I have a few gratuitous slides, and this is one of them. But I do want to tie it to education, because the project that I'm about to tell you about is at heart an educative project, even though it isn't a school-based project. And I think there is a rationale that with globalization and mobility, which is what people mean when they refer to the 21st century world or 21st century education, it requires new modes and forms of learning, which you'll see. And also that we learn with and from global others. It's harder and harder to stay isolated and in our own little towers, nor should we. So, even though it might have been better to do this later, I want to tell you a couple sentences about global story bridges, because it is the project, and as I go through a transmodalities framework, it is what I'm going to be tying it to. So just to get you understanding the context in which I'm talking, it's a project for kids, and it connects kids around the world through digital communication. In other words, computer-mediated, digitally mediated communication. There are currently 11 sites. They are, as you'll see later, well, they're all in communities of poverty, and all the kids in some way have to be learning English. I just told you about Uganda. You can imagine that English learners in the United States, it's different. You can imagine that for kids in Barcelona who are learning English, it's different. In Vietnam, in Mexico, in the countries where we have this, some kids, it's a school subject once or twice a week. With teachers who don't, by the way, speak English, which is interesting. For some kids, it's even less. So the kids, it looks different, but in some ways they're learning English. There are 11 sites, and there are 2 clusters, by which I mean there's kids who are roughly secondary school age, and they're communicating with one another. There's kids who are primary school age, about 11, 12 years old, and they're communicating with one another. They don't all communicate together. They're in age, 2 clusters by age. And it's out of school. It's not part of school curriculum. And what they do, as you will see, is they are told to create videos, digital stories, short videos about their lives and communities. They post them to the project website. They watch each other's, discuss them, post comments and questions, and have discussions about, in theory, about their lives. And how they live and how each other's live, how each other, I don't know what the grammar is there, so I'm just going to forget it. Okay, so this is a gratuitous slide. This was the very beginning, the first 2 sites. And the reason that I stuck it in here is that on the one on the left, you can see this is actually a US site that's primarily immigrant kids. And starting on your left, I hope, you've got a Hmong boy and a Latino boy and a West African immigrant. And I think that the little girl's African American, actually. Whereas in Uganda, they're all Baganda, and they all speak Luganda as their home language, and there's not the same kind of diversity within the group as there is in the US. So just to show you that there are differences. All right, I want to move through this pretty quickly. So the goals of the project are to enhance the language and literacy skills of the kids and English. And the reason I didn't say English language and literacy is because we want the kids to use all of the linguistic and semiotic codes that are part of their repertoires in making meaning with one another. So they're not told to only use English, we hope. But whatever they're producing that goes up on the website has to be in English, or the other kids won't understand it. So they're doing both. And in making the videos and telling the stories and, you know, sort of scripting them more or less formally and all sorts of things, they're enhancing language and literacy skills. They certainly enhance their technology skills. The project belongs to the kids. They decide what the videos are going to be. They make the videos. They edit the videos. They do everything, hopefully. And the goal that I've focused on for the research angle, and I should say that it is a project, but there is a research component, so it is both a service project and a research project. And so far, what I've been really focusing on is this third goal. I'm interested in how the kids encounter one another, how they make sense of one another and each other's lives, how being involved in this global exchange gives them sort of reflective tools to look back on or to look at their own lives and come to see themselves as, you know, globally situated, if indeed it does, all of those kinds of things. And so that's what I've been focusing on. So because, and this will explain a lot to you guys, because however hard I try to get away from it, I think sequentially. It's really hard for me to get away from that. So I'm going to say, I'm sort of telling this sequentially. Here's the project. And early on with the project, I came across ultimately lots and lots and lots of theories about cosmopolitanism. And that was eye-opening for me. It seemed to me to speak to exactly what the project does and is trying to do. And so I've done some writing framing it by, as you'll see in a minute, critical cosmopolitanism. But the cosmopolitanism literature, my understanding of it, and there's a divergent literature, so the parts that I align myself with and draw from, says that globalization is actually movement around the globe, but cosmopolitanism talks to or speaks to the ways that people encounter each other within the forces of globalization. And that, it seems to me, is what the project is doing. And there are three strands that I identified a number of years ago after really looking at the literature. And one is people, back as far as Martha Nussbaum, write about citizenship and affiliations and belongings and identity, and a number of people talk about those aspects. There are people who talk about ethics and morality as part of it, Appia for one, and the idea is it's not just that we coexist on this planet with these other people, it's that we actually have responsibility to and for others. And yeah, so we engage in the most ethical and moral ways that we can to support one another and to accept one another, and all of those, which leads into the last one, which is the importance of fostering dispositions of openness and caring and inquiry. I may have added the inquiry. I'm not sure I read that, but whatever. That's what the project does, right? We hope, is it takes these youth and it hopefully develops these dispositions. I mean, look at our world. Look at Barcelona. Look at the United States. Look at the ways that divisiveness is happening and growing, and all of that. How do we get people to engage with one another across difference from dispositions of openness and caring? And when I say inquiry, I mean simply the desire to and the valuing of learning about one another rather than just judging and distancing, okay? What's critical cosmopolitanism? Well, there's a guy named Denzin who's pretty big in qualitative research methods, and in a relatively recent piece of his, he talks about placing the voices of the oppressed at the center of the inquiry. And he's really saying that in qualitative research, you're missing the boat if that's not at the center of what you're doing. And so critical cosmopolitanism, and honestly I'm quoting myself here, is an overt focus on considerations of equity and social justice such that we engage in transnational encounters in ways that create and sustain just and equitable relations. And to me, that's the critical piece. It was a pun, but I meant the critical piece like critical cosmopolitanism. And that's what I hope the project was doing. Fine. So that's great. There's a theory for you. So what? Like, how does that help us to understand the work that these kids are doing and what's happening in the sort of semiotic exchanges and how they're being understood and all of that in their communications? How do we analyze them from a critical cosmopolitan lens? So I got that far, and then I needed a way into the data, right? So one of the things that I'll say right here is that there's a way into video and chat and multimodal data. It's called multimodality. And it's been developed from a number of strands. We were talking about this morning. One within CA, but the one that most literacy people at least take up is the Günter Kress version, the one that comes out of systemic functional linguistics. And they talk about multimodal data and ways into it, and so I turned to that. And I'm going to tell you right up front that this talk today is really pushing back against that. It's not saying that it's not good. It is good. It's fabulous. But like anything else, as you develop it, it gives us a starting point, but I think we need to go further. And so you'll see that I'm taking that and saying, but, you know, here's what it does, here's what it doesn't do. How do we think about this or that in transnational communications? And so that's hopefully what this is going to do. That's what transmodalities is. It's, if you will, a next iteration or next generation of thinking about how we think about multimodal communication. Okay. So I'm starting generally with a trans turn in applied linguistics. I said transmodalities, that's one piece, but how many of us locate ourselves or position ourselves within the field of applied linguistics in the room? You do. You three do. Go ahead and nod at me. Do you? Ish? Ish. Okay. So there is a trans turn. And I can prove this because we just have a new edited volume of applied linguistics out called the trans turn. And I think it's called the trans. I don't know what it's called, but it's something like the trans turn in applied linguistics. And haven't most of you heard about translanguaging and translingual practice and all of those hot sort of kind of new things that people are talking about? Yeah. So what's the trans turn? And what does it offer beyond where we were? Well, for one thing, it destabilizes the idea of language. So rather than code switching and other things, I think probably I'm saying things people already know, so I'll do it quickly, where, I don't know, you speak Spanish and you speak English, and so when you're talking to somebody, when are you using Spanish and when are you using English? It's moving us beyond that. And it's saying we have one repertoire of, and this is the first point, not only language, but other semiotic resources, and we draw on them fluidly and flexibly and creatively when we are attempting to make meaning with others or to communicate with others. Hopefully we're communicating to make meaning. Hopefully those are the same thing. So it's a coordination of semiotic resources, not just language alone. Trans, which I am taking to mean trans, crossing, right? So again, communication is occurring like everything else in our globalized world with increasing rapidity to expanding audiences. Sometimes my brain gets ahead of my tongue, sorry. Okay, to expanding audiences as communication happens faster and faster and faster through multiple modes, multiple resources everywhere around the globe, right? So it's translocal, it's transnational, it's transglobal. You can put trans in front of most things, and it enhances them. Also, though, there are new means and modes involved in communication, which is often taken probably correctly to mean technology enhanced or technology mediated or digitally mediated. Technology certainly plays a big role in the change in communication in the 21st century. And I didn't want to leave off transformative, because when you're talking about trans and crossing borders and crossing boundaries and having new means and new modes, it is transformative. And hopefully the transformative ties back to the sort of social justice equity piece that the critical cosmopolitanism calls for. We have to pay attention to what we're transforming and how. All right, I'm never going to get to the data here, but I will. So there are 5 what I call complexities, but call them what you will, pillars, points, to transmodalities as I've put it forward, at least at this point in time. So the first one is modes intertwined, and I'm just going to say that a lot of the work in multimodalities names modes. So if we can, there's categories of modes. So if you think about watching a video, for example, which is what we will do, you can think about the picture, you can think about the sound, you can think about the pacing, you can think about if people put music behind it, you know, the music, you can think about the speech, you can think about any kind of text or written thing in it. There's all sorts of modes you can identify, and people do that. But when you identify, and it's important to do that, but when you identify a mode, you miss the sort of symbiosis, if you will, or the synthesis of what happens when they come together. And it isn't, well, if you have voice and movement and music, you know, 1 + 1 + 1 = 3, it's not that simple. That they interact together, that they're an assemblage, if you will, and the meanings that they carry, the semiotic load is quite different than any one in isolation, or that we can understand by understanding each in isolation. Does that make sense? Okay, good, then I'll move on to the second one. So this is, I may not spend too much time on this, but it's the relationship between modes, language, and material objects, and there are a bunch of folks doing work on this in applied linguistics and otherwise right now, who are probably drawing primarily on Rahat and Latour. I've heard this across disciplines, by the way. It's theories of the material, or if you use Latour's language, it's actor network theory. And basically what it's saying is that in any kind of communication or interaction, people are one sort of node, and they are linked to others, to material objects, to all sorts of things that together shape one another to make meaning. And the work that we do, especially those of us who focus on language, focuses on people, because it's people who have language. But if we decenter humans, when we try to understand semiosis, we get something very different. In a piece I put out several years ago now, I talk about, in a particular video, what you can see. Even if there's no people, just looking at the terrain and the few objects in the picture, what does that tell you? And it tells you plenty. It carries meaning even without the people or the words or anything else. And so I'm probably not going to spend too much time on this, but if meanings are constructed between people and signs and things, and everything is not a matter of human intent, which is where we usually put it, then how do we understand it? Is this the next one? Yes. Okay. So the next one is production, assemblage, reception, and negotiation, which turns out to be fairly important because in multimodality, because we were talking about it earlier, but in multimodalities there is a lot of attention paid to people putting together groups of things to represent something to make meaning. So there's a list here of just some of the literature. Lemke, as back as 2002, in some really fabulous work, talks about design, multimodal design. Fluitt talks about production. Jewett, and they're not related, just kidding, talks about multimodal orchestration. And Fluitt, again, talks about multimodal improv. There's lots of terms for this. And every single one of them is the intent of people to put something multimodal together to represent something and to convey certain messages. And I've said in the recent article that I've written that may be in part because some of this work, although not all of it, is done in schools, where what you're looking at is kids working and trying to understand what they're doing, and you don't see the sort of chain of semiosis or arc of meaning making. But in fact, multimodal assemblages, how about that? Multimodal assemblages actually are put together. Jewett's got the handbook of multimodal research, is that what it is? And she says people orchestrate meaning through their selection and configuration of modes, and they do, but that doesn't really tell you anything because then it gets sent off, right? It goes somewhere and it's got an audience and it gets received, and how it's received and understood, and then the kind of negotiations that happen around its meaning are just as important as the intent of the makers. So there's these productive, receptive, and negotiated aspects that we have to pay attention to in order to understand it. All right, I'm going to get through this. I'm ready for data now. I don't know about you guys. Context and culture, which I've lumped together. So if you look down to about the third bullet, Kress, I forgot the other thing. Okay, Kress actually said the other side of the parentheses. Kress actually says mode is a socially shaped and culturally given resource for meaning making, and people who talk about multimodality do talk about culture because they think that signs, all signs, are embedded in cultural context and given meaning by the cultures. But if that's true, what happens in transnational communications when the receivers may not share the same cultural framings and understandings as the people who made them? And nobody accounts for this at all. And the rest of it, all right. So context, which is also talked about a lot, is talked about both as a setting. So if you talk about kids in Barcelona, they're sitting in Badia, and you can talk about that context, you know, of their lives and that shape their understandings and what they do. Then you talk about the kids in Uganda, and it's different. But the context is also the context of the multimodal artifact itself. It creates its own context. So that's another thing. And then I won't get into this here, but the attention to time, place, fluidity is just to say you cannot talk about, well, here's a culture or a community or any more than you can talk about a language, and here's another one, because they're fluid and because they change. And how would you say, if it's culturally shaped, what's a culture? I do this with my undergraduates. We talk about what's a culture for years on end and never get anywhere. But because they change and shift, and you know, so much does, you can't talk about this is cultural as if that gives it some sort of stable meaning. All right. So how do you define culture and context in an era of mobility was the last one on there. And then the very last one has to do with transnationalism and relations of power, which actually gets almost completely ignored in the multimodal literature because relations of power and privilege infuse everything and are at the heart of the relationships that people form from the ideologies or stereotypes or biases or whatever it is that they're bringing. And so there's issues of access to technology, you know, and materials and resources and voice and capital and that, all of those things. So I'm going to finish with this because I'm bored with it myself, and I'm going to get to data, I hope. So the data, these are countries we have project sites in. I'm going to show you data today from Barcelona and Uganda. And I probably shouldn't do this because the data is not de-identified. There's a loophole through which I can do it, but I shouldn't do it. So if anybody recognizes anybody, just keep it to yourself. That's all I'm saying. And the Barcelona site is in Badia, and I hope in this room I'm not going to have to do a lot of explanation about what kind of neighborhood that is, right? Well, for you, it's close to the university, and it is considered one of the poorest neighborhoods, right, in Barcelona, because it has to be in communities of poverty. And in Uganda, we have 3 Uganda sites, but everybody's pointing. It's just over there. It's just over there. It's all those high rises over there. It's right by the big IKEA, although I don't really know why, but okay. So in Uganda, this is a really small rural village, and you will see that. It would be very different if it was in one of the few cities or really large towns in Uganda, but it isn't. And so in Badia, the kids come from many places. Many of them, if not most of them, I think, are not, they're not from Barcelona, they're not from Catalonia, right?
They are their families.
Their families are not, okay. But in Uganda, and many of them don't speak Catalan, and they do take English in school, they're in high school, they do take English in school, but the level of their English varies from almost none to what, intermediate, maybe? Is that fair? I'm asking the people who have spent more time in the site than I actually have, yeah? Whereas in Uganda, the kids speak from Arua there, I'll think of what tribe they are in a minute, but they speak whatever they speak at home. Tell you what it is in a second, their language. I'm having what my children call a senior moment, and it happens disgustingly often. Ooh, that's on tape. All right, so I'll think of their language in a second, but in, what?
You told us yesterday in Galia.
What the language was, yeah, Lugbara, it's Lugbara, yes. It doesn't often come back, it came back, it's Lugbara. And they all speak it at home, and they go to school, and schooling is in English. So what happens is that by the time they're in secondary school, which these kids are, they actually have pretty much English, even though they never speak it outside of school, but they never get the opportunity to actually speak it. It's all reading and writing and, you know, because they don't talk a lot in school. That's the educational system in the way that it works. So those are the kids. I am going to show you, but not quite in its entirety, but almost. Is it taking up the whole screen? It's big enough. I'm going to show you a video that the kids in Barcelona made, okay? And I'm not going to show it all to you because we don't really have time, but I'll show you a good bit of it. And pay attention because there actually is a quiz afterwards. Okay, I'm going to stop it. I forgot the most important thing. The kids are told, when I say a video, I shortchange this a bit. The kids are told that what they're there to do is to make digital stories, short videos of their lives and communities, and they realize that they're sharing them with kids in all of these other sites so that those kids can learn about them and their lives, and they know that they will be seeing videos that the other kids make as well. And it all has to be done collaboratively. This is not social networking. So they have to agree. What's the video going to be about? What are the shots we're going to put in? The editing stuff. You know, what are we going to do? And then they post it. And then when the other sites get it, they have a collaborative conversation. It's all collaborative about what they saw and noticed and thought about it. And then they post comments and questions to the kids who made it. And those kids answer it because there's a chat space below the video. Sorry, that was probably important. Now you know what they're doing. Oh man, that's not so good. Let's do this again. Oh, really? There we go. Sorry. I'm going to leave it alone. So any spelling, anything, it's the way the kids did it. They're not error-free, and I have not edited. So much for anonymity, huh? All right, do you have the idea? I'm just going to fast forward. So then another group does this, okay? You can see they do it, maybe. And then there's another group that also does a karaoke, I think, but a different one. All right, you have the idea? Okay. Now, then there's the second part that they talked about. Am I there? Oh, come on now.
What are you doing, Alex? Why are you collecting some soil? Are you gonna plant garlic? Now we are mixing the soil we get from the park.
Ya sé, ya sé, ya sé. Ya sé, ya sé. Ya sé, ya sé, ya sé.
I'm the most little of the family.
I'm the most handsome of... I am the oldest sibling, and I am always the baby.
I'm the father of the family and I'm a little bit old.
I'm the mother of the family called 3-8.
The sum of all our members.
Made us suffer. We want...
The revenge.
That makes 3.80. Okay, I am going to pay with a bill.
We make our enemies clash with cups.
We jump into the head of the enemy.
There is a coin.
Okay. That doesn't work. So that's the video, right? So what I want you to do for a minute, name me some modes you saw. Quick, 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 quick. Name some modes. If we wanted to just label modes, what'd you see? The sound. But, and even that we could break down, right? So there was music behind it. There was the talking as part of the video. There was the talking purposefully in English, and then there was some, was it Spanish or Catalan back behind? So yeah, so there's a lot of different sound, language, music, whatever. There's writings. What? There's writing. There's gestures. There's, okay, so you've got, so there's the transitions. There's the timing and the pace of it. There's all those things. Okay. If we took any one of those, would it be the same as what you get when they're combined? And would we be able to say they said this, or they pointed to that, or the gesture, or they played this music behind it, right? That doesn't tell us anything. So the for research purposes, how do you get into the meanings that are carried by those different modes, and they're combined in very different ways. That actually would matter. It would matter how you would help kids to make videos to represent or to convey the messages they want to, if you could understand how certain combinations would be effective to do or to show certain things. And in fact, we have that. We have things that kids can't understand, whereas if you could put in, kids who receive it, whereas if you put in a caption or there's certain things you can do to enhance what it is you want to get across. Okay, relationship between modes, language, and material objects. What'd you see? You can pick any one of the 3 different things. And that's really interesting, right? They personified the coins, actually. I'm the handsome one in the family, and I'm the oldest one in the family. Right, so they made a whole story where they actually did personify the coins. Right, and if you think about the karaoke, it's karaoke. I mean, without the karaoke, without the, the screen and the music and everything else, it makes no sense, right? And the meaning there wasn't, in fact, carried by talk. Production, assemblage, reception, negotiation, we're not going to do. We are, but in a minute, because you haven't seen that arc. You've only seen what they produced.
If you go back to the second one, you mentioned earlier Latourian theory.
Mm-hmm.
I think that if you want to apply Latourian theory here, you could say that these students are very much aware of the generativity of the camera.
Of? The camera, good one. Right, right. They're doing it to the camera and the, good point. Perfect point. Exactly. So the camera is an object that is an actor in this interaction, and it carries its own weight in what's done, how it's done, and what gets communicated. And it would be done quite differently without the camera, right? The context in culture, what can you say about that? All right, I'm going to come back to that one, because you might have to see it juxtaposed to something else to really get it. And you can't say anything about transnationalism and relations of power because you haven't seen the interaction, so now you will. Except I can't read it because it's so small. All right, so this is what the Uganda kids wrote with the responses underneath. I'm going to go through this super quick. They said, what is karaoke in your understanding? Because this way in Uganda we understand it differently. Okay, they don't know what karaoke is, at least not this way. So the kids here say, karaoke is singing a song while you are reading the lyrics on the screen and you are listening to the music. Imagine watching that whole first half of the video if you didn't know what karaoke was. What are they looking at? What are they doing, right? Art. Right. After they got them, I've just put them together. Are you people watching while singing? Because it's like all your eyes are focused on one point and the same song is playing in the background. They really don't know what it is, and they say, yes, we're reading the lyrics, right? What is Camposana made of? Did you guys notice that the fertilizer or peat or whatever they were putting in said Camposana on the bag? And so that's what they're asking. What is Camposana made of? And they answered peat, perlite to facilitate drainage of plants, lime, and organic fertilize. Verbatim. Which type of soil was that young man scooping in the valley? We don't know. It was normal soil from the valley, our place here, right? When you people were for karaoke activity, why was the young man in red jacket not active? He doesn't know the dance. How long does garlic take to mature? 6 months. What are they actually interested in? The garlic. All right. This is the rest of it. Same one. The containers for growing the garlic were labeled. Are they of different types? Yes, they come for different recycled bottles. Bet that made no sense. Were you people in the classroom during the karaoke activity? No, we were in the youth center. Did you people live out the sketch activity, or is it the same as the Revenge for Coin? All the sketches are unreal. We created the ideas. Is the growing of garlic one of your projects, or you just did it for video purpose? Is one of the projects of Young Center. I think they meant Youth Center. Thank you for encouraging us to keep working in this project. You are doing a good job as well, because they said you're doing a great job, the last one. I've merged two different ones together here. So now, if this works, oh no, and then they come back, the Ugandan kids come back after those responses and say, our friends, here are some comments and questions on your responses. Here in Uganda, we take karaoke to that time in disco clubs where ladies come to dance half naked or in pants. What is peat and perlite made of, and what quantity is required to make up that packet of composana? Right? You said the young man didn't know how to dance. Didn't he complain when you chose dance as an option? Is the garlic for consumption or commercial purposes? Which activities do you perform during summertime? How long is the summer break? This is because the kids here just told them that they were about to go on summer break. So that's why they're asking that. Do you use social accounts like Facebook, email, etc.? If yes, we can create Facebook groups so as to chat, and as you will be for summer break. Thanks. God bless all of you in your preparation for the summer break. Now do you see the cultural differences? All right. Modes intertwined. Now let's skip modes intertwined. We killed that. Relationships between mode, language, and material objects. So now the data that you're looking at is all language data, right? But still, let's not do this. All right, let's do the production, assemblage, reception, and negotiation. Let's do the middle, the third and the fourth one. Production, assemblage, reception, and negotiation. Now what do you see?
I guess the chat gives us an idea about what's being received.
And how? And how closely it aligned with the human intent of the kids who made the video, right? So for example, they're representing themselves doing karaoke. That doesn't go over well when karaoke is not a shared cultural activity, so there's no understanding of what that is on the other side, right? So I'm crossing over into context and culture. When you don't have the shared frames and you're sending messages, what gets understood? Now, the kids put in the garlic activity. Everything in Uganda, where those kids live, in the small villages, everything is about planting and growing and crops. Their entire school curriculum is built around it. So they want to know exactly what's in there, and they want to know what kind of soil it was and how much and what, this and that is. Kids here don't care. They're not out planting stuff, and they're not their lives don't depend on what they personally grow, right? So you get into these differences where the messages just don't carry the same meaning, and then they come back with the questions. And it's not as simple as saying, so then they ask questions and then they negotiate so they understand. No, not necessarily. When the distance is too far apart, that negotiation is not always successful, right? And the context and culture, I want to show you something else, so I'm going to move on fairly quickly. The context and culture is...
What cues were they given for producing these videos?
They are told to make videos about their lives and communities originally, that they're to share their lives and communities, and they are told that it's their choice, that they have to talk together to decide what themes are and what they want to do. Now, I can say, thanks to these ladies here, because this is why we know, well, no, actually, Zaro told me, so it isn't necessarily because of you, but what happened was that they had this group of kids, and it was very hard to sort of keep them corralled and focused here, and so they divided them into, she decided to do it like production companies, and she divided them into 3 groups. And so that's why you saw 3 different parts of that video, because each group did one rather than having it be all of them together. But they got to decide what it is, what they share, what they want to do. And so one could claim, I suppose, that the karaoke activity and the garlic thing is something about their lives here. The last one was simply just a fantasy film that they wanted to make, but they drive it. It's up to them, pretty much, what they do. So, all right, so what I want to show you, and I hope it will show you the power of the framework, I want to contrast it to a Uganda video. Am I in the way? No. Note the absence of spoken language. Note the decision to use the natural sounds when they're down by the creek and put music behind when they're in the village. Like, all of these things carry meaning. All right, in the interest of time, the boys are about to pound millet. I'll let you see it for 1 second, then I'm going to move on. Oh, no, sorry. They're watering the cows. They're not pounding millet. All right, so they're just going to pound the millet, right? Here's the chat. Hello, this is from Barcelona. Hello, our friends. We really liked your video. We are surprised about how different your routine is. We want to ask you some questions. How do you share the household chores? Do girls always go to take the water? Do you do the household chores every day? Is it hard for you to do the household chores, or are you used to? At what time do you start school? Do you always finish the school at 5 p.m.? How do you learn to bring the water on the head? At what age do you start taking the water on the head? What is the mixture for? When the mixture is dry, does it smell? Don't you get hurt with the flip-flops? Why do you wear a uniform? For how long do you have this water, and what did you use it for? And this is still the Barcelona kids. In our case, we have fountains everywhere, so we don't appreciate it. We think you take care more about the water you have and you don't waste it. In relation to the household chores, we think that you have a very responsible attitude because we only help at home if our parents ask for. Moreover, we tend to complain, which is my favorite one. We only have 3 weeks left, then we start our summer vacations. We will try to send you one last pictures, and we hope that you have time to respond to our questions before the 22nd of May. Thank you so much. Okay, and then they respond by saying, hello, our great friends. Here are answers to your questions. Yes, girls do fetch water as well as boys. The way we divide household chores, girls in most cases do work, which are in line with food preparation, cleaning, while boys may go for farming and grazing. Yes, the household chores are in daily basis. Absolutely, we are used to, and it has part of our daily work from the school, 7:30 to 5. Balancing the jerry of water on the head is something very easy with the help of head ring. Boys too can balance it. They do it as early as 5 years old. For smearing our room, because they are not cemented, neither are they tiled. After drying, it does not smell. Did you catch that it's made out of manure? You saw that part. What are flip-flops? What are flip-flops? Because they don't call them that. Uniforms enable us to easily identify each other. The water's there throughout the year for most of our domestic work. Thanks very much. Love you all. Okay, so that's the chat. I want to show you then what the Barcelona kids did. It's very short. The Barcelona kids posted a video actually in response to all of this and to what they saw, and it's called Imitating Our Ugandan Friends, I think. And here in its entirety, it is.
Look at her.
Pero a ella le gusta más mi mojilla. Pero ¿cómo le sabía mi mamá? Aquí porque...
Okay, so they watched and said, oh, friends, watched your video where you were trying to imitate our skills of carrying water on the it's so funny and interesting. The two who tried to do so, what was very hard, because we believe that all ladies can do the balancing, not even jerry can water only, but anything that needs to be carried on the head. And why didn't the others also try? Why were you throwing the bottles up? Thanks. Right? And then these kids come back and say, Mariama, the first one who tried, says that it was easy, but Celia, the second one, says it was very difficult. We all tried, but we didn't film it. We throw the bottles because it's funny and it's a trend. All right. So if I go back here, and I'm almost done, you'll be happy to know, but if I go back here, you can see that there would be lots to say about any one of these complexities. The modes intertwined, I tried to point out a few as the video was going through. The modes were so different, and so were the things and the objects and what you could see in the video and everything else that gave such different feels of both places and convey so much that we could talk about that for an hour. And that really is both of the first two. The objects themselves that you could see in the frames, and in some cases the lack of them, speaks volumes, right? The production, assemblage, reception, and negotiation is, I think, what's really fascinating about this particular chain, to see what they're doing and how it's received and understood or not, and how they try to negotiate. I will anecdotally say that, in fact, last week I was in Uganda, and I met with the facilitator of that site, and a guy who, much like you all, works for a university there, but it's his village. He got me there to the site, and he's, you know, sort of involved, although he's not there all the time. But he went and he talked to the kids. And they were really confused. And so it's anecdotal, but he just told me last week, he said he tried to talk to them about, or not he tried to, he talked to them about what they did last year. That video went up last May. So what they did last year and you know, what happened. And he said the kids were really confused. And he said, they said that they don't really understand the last video you just saw. And they said because they were playing, and for us it is real. That was the quote. For us it is real. And so even just that kind of communication, and I also think, while it clearly points to context and culture, because in fact it turns out, I always learn things from these, it turns out that you may know this thing of the filling bottles with water or something and flipping them and that's like a trend in Europe. It's not a trend in the US, but it's a trend here. It's a lot of kids are doing that, right? Is it? Oh, I haven't seen it. Okay. But at any rate, it's a trend in Europe, and so it's something that they did. And they said it's a trend, and that's the culture. But that is not a cultural activity that kids in Uganda who are doing this because they need it to survive. You would never play with water. Sorry. You just wouldn't do that. So this is where the context, the culture, and the recognition of things matters so much. But I also think it starts to speak to transnationalism in relations of power in who gets to play with water and who doesn't, right? So you get these sort of positioning tied to capital and all sorts of things. Go. Yeah.
It's almost like it's sort of on an emotional level, it's trivializing the very act of carrying the water. To see
Exactly.
that whole action, you know, kids just kind of dropping it and laughing
Exactly.
and joking, and then you see some of the water on the floor.
Exactly.
So it's almost like that's when the distance sinks in, because the problem is that unless and until you understand that that action is heavyweight and there's a skill that goes with it and it's every single day and there's so much, you know, investment in terms of, you know, walking to that area,
Right.
bringing it back.
Right. And your life depends on it. Yeah. Exactly.
So in a way, doesn't it then sort of break that continuum of communication when somebody does something like this unintentionally?
So what I would say, there are many examples of things that are done unintentionally that send messages that kids don't necessarily intend to send. In theory, I would like to be able to tell you that those are the learning moments. As it turns out, for the years that we've done this, that facilitator role and the educational component is key. And if it could be used as a learning moment for kids to really engage and learn about others and learn about engaging with others, it would be fabulous. We're working on that. But to me, honestly, one of the powers of the Transmodalities framework is that it can point to these times and moments and ruptures, if you will, call them what you will. What we want is for these kids to build relationships with each other, and in fact, there's data to say that these kids did. They wanted, as you saw a little bit of, to exchange Facebook and other, you know, they wanted to stay in touch when summer vacation was coming and they weren't going to be part of the project anymore, and, you know, they even got in touch with me and said, how can we do that? And, you know, they did care about one another. But I'm hoping that the Transmodalities framework can actually point to these places that, if they feed back into the project, can strengthen it. Because yes, right now, doesn't that disrupt it? Sure it does. Sure it does. Yeah.
To comment on what you said and something else that you showed here reminded me of another thing. So I'll get 2 points and there's several. We had someone defend a PhD last year, I think it was, Francesca? Was it last year? I don't know if you've heard of the platform Solia, telecollaboration virtual exchange. It's enormous now. It's permission to do, because she was a facilitator. They have a facilitator role because they have a model set up how to do collaboration.
Mm-hmm.
And they have a facilitator role, they have trained a facilitator, and then her research in her doctoral thesis found exactly that the facilitator role is key.
Mm-hmm.
That you have to push for these moments
Mhm.
of misunderstandings, because as you said, they're critical moments when learning most things.
Exactly.
So I completely agree with you that the
Yeah.
facilitator is going to have a very, very, very critical role
Right.
in that. And something that happened in one of the videos, the book that I wrote to as I'm editing, one of the chapters, the book's on telecollaboration, and one of the chapters is between students and adults in Myanmar refugee camp and the school here in Salvador. And they mention, Uganda students mention God. when
They do.
And that happened in
Yeah.
the same
Yeah.
sort of with the Myanmar refugees. They
Right.
say God bless and all this stuff. And people started like, why are they?
Right.
So again, that there were moments where if there hadn't been a facilitator there, these misunderstandings.
Right. Right, but even, I mean, one of the points that I make in the article is, even with facilitators, it's not just like we've got Barcelona and Uganda, and we've got Vietnam, and we're about to have India, and and they're all communicating. The facilitator, or even me, like, we can't understand or know the specifics of each and every one of those cultures. And so one of the interesting questions becomes, so how do you understand, because we don't have the emic perspectives, we can't, nobody can have all of them. How do we do the research? How do we understand? How do we support where there's miscommunications? And so one of the things that I'm trying to do is to put together an international research team, actually, where we do have people like the guy I mentioned in Uganda, like some of your faculty here, various people who come together where we can have the emic perspectives represented and look at these together and learn so much more than any one of us can trying to do the research across distances, which is almost impossible. So, and I think that that's probably not just desirable, but absolutely necessary in order, if we want to really try to analyze and understand what's going on, and also, as I say, feed it back into the project.
You can always avoid miscommunication. I think that's inevitable, isn't it?
You can't ever avoid miscommunication, but I think it's those moments and what you do with it. So it would have been what we might call a teachable moment with this water thing, had the facilitator, and I mean, she was fabulous. She couldn't have been expected to know this, but had she been able to go back and have them in some way do research or something, or focus on Uganda, or even ask the right questions to elicit from those kids about the role of water, the scarcity of water, what it takes to survive, it could have been a teachable moment for those kids. But how you get, I mean, we're certainly not to that point yet. Not at any of the sites, because of what it takes to get there. Yeah, so I'm sort of done. I have two last slides that are just sort of recapping. One is some of the challenges with transmodalities, all of which I really covered, I think, and what it does. So I won't do these two last slides, and the others are promises. You can read them. But we're out of time, so I think what I'd rather do for a few minutes is, if there's questions, great, but if there's comments, these are really helpful to me. So, anybody got anything?
Sorry.
More, no, this is good.
Sorry, the fourth point.
This one?
This counter-stereotyping racism. Yeah, I think that's a great promise.
I didn't say it's happening, I said it's a promise.
This is exactly the point that we keep running across with all our studies as well, because I work with
Right.
and the distance.
Right.
And like you, I think it has to be done over time.
But-
Because otherwise you run that risk.
But I also think it speaks to the third point. So I have for years, I don't do it anymore, but I had for years run international student teaching programs for some of our undergraduate pre-service teachers at the university. And I stuck them not at that site, but in a very small village in western Uganda and a tiny little village on the coast in Mexico and whatever. And if you don't do any work around it, all it does is reify and exacerbate stereotypes and bias. But I have come to believe over a lot of years that the thing that overcomes that is the building of relationships, and that any short-term or one-shot thing probably isn't going to work even if you do the work around it. And so what I want is, right. But if they can, right, and if they can stick with it and build those relationships, and it goes back to the critical cosmopolitanism and the ethics of caring and inquiry and all of that, where they learn that this is interesting and there's lots to learn and lots to know. And I think, I have to think about it, I thought about it as it went past. I mean, there's even instances there where you can see that the connection with one another. It was the kids here. What did they say? Oh, we don't do that for our parents, and if we do, we complain. Where you can even see them turning the lens backwards and having a different kind of look at their own lives because of these contacts or connections with something that they weren't familiar with before. It's just, it's slow. You're right. It's really slow.
I completely agree with you as well that it does force them to have an lens on themselves.
Yeah.
Because I've had students, I've said, well, you know, they say, well, we're going to do intercultural things and they're food and come on, stop. Well, that's what
We had a new group yesterday, and I kept asking them what they wanted to make a video about, and they kept saying, oh, the food we eat here, paella, and what else were they? Oh my God. And I was like, okay, what else? And then we just get more kinds of food.
What you have to do is say, okay, what do you do? Think about the things that you do that are strange. And they say, we don't do anything strange. And I said, what about this Mr. Poop Law? Yes. Somebody explain the Poop Law. Okay, I do. Tell me it's not strange.
Christmas what?
The Christmas Poop Law. Uncle
Oh.
Christmas Poop Law. And then it poops.
Okay.
Yes. You have to beat it first. You beat it, and then it poops gifts. It's not gift. Look at their faces. Look at their faces. It's strange.
Okay.
Yeah, and then when they realize, oh, that is strange, and you say, okay, try to explain that to someone who doesn't understand, and then they start laughing, and they realize, yeah, we have things. It's, make them holding up that mirror is
Yep.
so important.
Yep.
I completely agree
Yep.
with you on that. They've got to see that what's normal for us is not necessarily
Right.
normal for others.
Right.
It doesn't mean it's right or wrong.
Right. Right. But it's cross-cultural learning. Okay, anybody else? Is that a hand, Julia, or are you just, oh. Well, if you have questions, ask, but if you don't, give me some feedback. What was like, what really sort of, where did you go aha, if anywhere, and where were you lost, and where should I change something?
For me, I think the framework became really clear after we saw the chat data.
So take it out from after the video and from after the first video and get that, yeah. Okay.
Because the chat data helped us to see all of
Different ones, yeah. That's true. Okay.
I don't know if this was appropriate, but this is more of a comment regarding the program itself.
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking of the presentation on Tuesday, and I'm thinking that would there be more possibilities of encountering differences and perhaps creating those learning moments if the two groups, if each group collaboratively decided what they wanted to make their videos about? But what if both groups were in communication beforehand and decided this is the way we're going to go about doing this? Do I explain myself?
Yeah, if I'm understanding, and tell me if I'm not answering what you asked. First of all, there's more than two groups, of course. There's five or six.
Yeah.
And the idea is this isn't a one-off. It goes on. So after they make the videos and have the conversations, while they're doing that, they're making their next video. And so the assumption is, not the assumption, actually what happens is that there'll be certain themes that come up that they find interesting and they make a video in response to that. So the videos sort of fit in with the discussions, but I really want the kids to think in essence, to think about what you're saying. Who are we? What are our lives? How would we want to represent or portray that to other people who don't share them? And part of that, as I start with the groups, is yesterday, this new group, we said, okay, so you're going to be talking to kids in Uganda. What do you know about Uganda and how people live? What do you know about Kenya? What do you know, where the other sides were? What do you know about Vietnam? What would you want to know? What do you think they might want to know about you? And I want to get this idea of audience to them and of, this sort of responsive, sort of deliberate planning based on the relationships that they're building. So we could do that. It would be a different way of going about it. But neither of these were the first videos that the respective sites made. They, in fact, each were the second, as it happens. Well, the jerry can thing, or the water bottle thing was the third, I guess. But the idea is, I'm sort of taking a long view, and that over time, things come up, and that's, they do develop among the kids, and that's what they respond to.
What was interesting is in the response video, for example, by the children, the young people from Vallejo, is their response video had totally different, well, the topic was the same.
The water in a jug,
yeah. But it was not, okay, so we've seen what your life is like, now we're going to show you what our life is.
Right.
They
Right.
did not respond that way.
Right. Or, quite possibly, and this would take a different sort of data than we have here, quite possibly they looked and they just went, wow, they're carrying that on their heads. And what they really meant to do was to try. And when they failed, because nobody wants to fail, they turned it into, in the moment, into something else. And that I wasn't there, and that's where you need this kind of data. We'd have to have been there to see how it played out. But so it's possible that they started with a more authentic actual response, and then,
Yeah, I kind of heard in that a voice of weary rest. We can't do it.
Right. Right.
She came in late, but she's been working with the London Knowledge Lab, so she's been working with Chris and Judith. Maybe you want to add something?
Sorry, it was late, so I didn't.
Not to put you on the spot or anything.
No.
She loves multimodalities, social habits.
Yeah, so, for example, sorry, I'm late, so I was
It's okay.
late, so I didn't know. You were showing what they were saying, what they were exchanging, and then the video, right?
I was showing the videos that they made,
Yeah.
and then the questions, comments, and responses that they had to the video, because on the website, they get to post the videos, and then there's a chat space underneath. So all the different sites get to post comment. I mean, I just focused here on Uganda and Barcelona, but all the sites get to post comments and questions. The kids, the kid makers of the videos answer them, and where once it gets going, it becomes more like a discussion because the different sites read the postings from other sites as well, and so they get into discussion about it. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, no, I was just asking that because, for example, what I would go into if I analyze, for example, my children is that I will go, for example, for gaze, so, and then I will go for movement, and then I will kind of go for how that just orchestrates in what they're showing or in what they're doing. And for example, I will go for how, with the water, right? How they move with the water, how they're so still, right? And how the children from Barcelona were just kind of, just relaxed in their bodies and how.
Barcelona or Uganda?
Oh, no, the ones from here, the ones that were playing with the water.
Oh, okay. So tell me why. Tell me what once you look at that, what does that tell us?
Because the same thing that you can see or understand when they are saying, but why would they play with the water? Is kind of the same thing that you can see while you see how their posture is while carrying the water, right? They're very kind of, just very concentrated on not, throwing the water. Their walking is very, kind of elongated in a way. And when the children here are playing with the water, their posture is different. There's people walking around. And when the children in Uganda have the water in their heads, they're walking in a line. Right?
Okay, so what does that tell us? What's the implication of that?
The implication would be that, for example, just by the way in which they behave or in which they just use that water and that water carrying is different, right? So it would just add to the point that water is different for them. Not only using what they say,
Okay.
but the way they,
They interact with the water. Yeah.
Your assumption that this has bothered them.
Right. Well, no, I think what she's saying is that their bodily relationship to the water, to water as a thing, is actually different.
yeah.
Yeah.
That will add.
Yeah, yeah.
And that will add. So when I'm looking into data, I will go for example, movement as well. For not only what they say, but for movement to make a point. So, as
Right.
you're saying, kind of
Right.
suggestions, I will go for not only what they say, what do you think, why are you playing with water, but actually by looking at how they behave.
Right. Right. So you did miss the beginning framing, talking about the modes, yes? Because what I was saying is that a lot of the work in multimodality has been on identifying modes and sometimes categorizing modes and figuring out how you can analyze a mode and what it can tell you, which is, I think, what you're telling us. But one of the things that I'm also saying is that something happens when those modes, like in the synthesis between modes, that carries meaning, that carries semiotic weight, that's more than what this mode plus this mode plus this mode does. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't name modes and look at what each contributes. In fact, I'm saying we should, but I'm saying that we also have to understand them in tandem, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I do that.
Yeah.
I go for modes and then I go for everything together.
Yeah.
But it was very big, so you cannot make, for example, movement and actually gaze. You couldn't see what they were actually looking at. But if you analyze, for example, movement in relation to gaze, maybe we could have something, because just by the way they were walking, the gaze was kind of, just directed to where they were going, and then the children were just looking around.
Right.
Same thing with that movement.
Right, so the concentration and focus versus the sort of play.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're right. It exactly bolsters it. That's right.
I mean, it also comes down to the philosophical orientation in terms of a vision of life. Like when you look at the children in Uganda, you get a sense of seriousness, of focus, of a certain, there's no room to be trivial. Or
There's no play.
Funny. Actually, even being funny or smiling or too much of smiling or too much of, there's no space for that. I mean, this is like life where they're doing domestic chores and they're doing Whereas, so I kind of wondered, like in a certain sense, the contexts are not really comparable because
Correct.
there's a philosophical,
Right.
you know, cut there.
Right.
So where do you even begin with
Right.
the cultural piece? Because to even get those kids to understand that, you know,
Right.
the scarcity of water, I mean, that would be point number one. That's absolutely evident to anybody who looks at it. Really, okay, so there's
Well, not to everybody. It depends, right, on how much of the world you've been exposed to beyond your own context and how much you even have thought about it or do think about it. But you see, I think, to me, you're pointing me back, theoretically speaking, to critical cosmopolitanism, where, yes, absolutely, but is the answer to that to say, well, they can't understand, so they shouldn't be having these exchanges? Or is the answer to that to say, it even points to why, more importantly, to why these exchanges are so necessary in our world, and how do we get there, right? How do we cross those cultural and contextual divides to enhance that understanding? And as I said, I'm hoping that the transmodalities gives us a way into that. It's not any answer in and of itself, because what we learn, we have to figure out how to feed, like you're saying, back into the project to be able to do that work. But first we have to understand where those disconnects are and why and how all of this plays into it and how it all works in order to be able to do that.
Yes, and I was thinking of your work on critical cosmopolitanism. I mean, it would be interesting to actually, when you look at the very action of trying to put water on top of your head and balancing it, I mean, it's just like you think about any other culture. You see an action, and then you basically, as an outsider observing that action, you will take the very superficial act and you will try and reproduce it without thinking that there is something that goes, it's the issue with multiculturalism. In Canada, for example, you take the ethnicities and, you know, the stereotypes, and then you represent them thinking that, you know, this is what it is, whereas it's not.
It's not.
So it's not.
Right.
It's way deeper.
And that goes back to what I was saying earlier, although briefly, about needing those emic perspectives in order to understand, because without that, we're all just glossing over some of the really deep differences because we just don't know. Yep. Anybody else?
I'm going to throw out here something that's going to be
Niggling at you.
a big problem. This word global citizenship, and we were talking about this when we were doing a special issue on intercultural communication. Increasingly, the word global for me is being taken over and appropriated by neoliberal values.
Yep. Neoliberal values. Yep.
And
Yep.
so on the one hand, I'm like, well, we got to push this, we got to push this, we got to push this. And then and I'm telling my students, you've got to get out and you should be doing telecollaborations. And I'm telling her she should be doing telecollaborations. And then I think, well, wait a minute, careful, because it can go, you got these two extremes of fuzzy, feel good, and then this other one, which is we're equipping them for becoming a global citizen, which means becoming a rich banker who knows how to scam the world.
Right.
You know? And I don't know if anyone do you have an answer? Because this is
I
what
do.
I struggle with.
Critical cosmopolitanism.
Okay, I'll read more.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's why critical cosmopolitanism, right? That's
Critical has to be in there.
yeah. Yeah.
It's a difficult, well, I don't want to use the word trend, but there is a
Right.
movement.
So so I teach a class. We have something, I don't know if you guys have anything like it. We have FIGs for our incoming freshmen, first year students. at the university, and I think I was at that university for 18 years before I taught undergraduates. And they have, the FIGs are called freshman interest groups, and they take, it's because we're a really big institution, and so our freshmen come in and get totally lost. Like we don't have good advising, we don't have anything. So and it's not just us. There's lots of campuses that do this, but they started these freshman interest groups where these kids come in, what, they're 18? Kids to me, sorry for anybody who's, but anyway. And they sign up for a FIG, and the FIGs have themes, and they're comprised of 3 sort of connected, thematically connected courses that all 20 kids take together, so that in their first semester, they find other kids with similar interests, and they're in 3 courses together, so they have a chance to sort of bond, and research shows that those kids stay, you know, friends. They're each other's sort of primary networks all the way through, and it gives them a home base. That's the rationale for it. So I teach a FIG. I started a FIG called Globalization, World Regions, and Globalizing Education. And I teach the Globalizing Education course, and it is such a struggle. I have them, they take an intro to cultural anthropology, which does very similar work to what I do in the education course, and then they take an intro to international studies, which is totally a neoliberal approach, totally, to globalization. And so I watch this play out, and to try to move past that surface take on globalization and what it means, to actually thinking about how it implicates real people and their lives and the kinds of consequences on people, it's so hard. And I try because in our state, in most states, the state statutes around education pay lip service to global education, and the kids should be, you know, learning about this even K-12. And I've been to every school, okay, not in the state, but a ton of them, secondary and primary, trying to find teachers who are doing something meaningful with globalization. And they will tell you that in social studies, they study certain regions. Yeah, I mean, look at the difference between this and studying a region. Or at the primary school, they have potlucks, and everybody gets to bring in food from where they're from, back to food. Nobody in education is actually taking deep dives into the important and critical issues that are part and parcel of globalization. They just aren't. And it's depressing. Sorry. We're seeing them. We're seeing them.